Most people searching for real strength have spent years reaching for meat, convinced that anything plant-based or grain-based was settling for less. But the bread baked in Galilee 2,000 years ago was nothing like the pale, pillowy loaf on a modern shelf. It was a dense, hand-shaped round pressed from emmer wheat and ground pulses, carrying a kind of fullness that stayed in the body across a full day of labor under open sun. That combination of ancient grain and legume flour, mixed together in ways that have since been quietly forgotten, produced a protein density that would quietly embarrass most things people buy at a premium today. And the women who baked it every morning weren't thinking about nutrition at all. They were feeding working bodies that couldn't afford to go hollow by midday. Jesus broke that bread, passed it, multiplied it, and treated it as enough. What it actually contained, and why it fed people the way it did, is something most of us were never told. The belief runs deep. You can trace it in almost every kitchen, every gym, every conversation about eating well. Grain is background. Bread is comfort. Carbohydrate, filler. The real work of nourishing a body, the serious business of strength and endurance, belongs to animal flesh. This is not a fringe idea. It is the quiet assumption underneath most of what modern people believe about food. And most of us absorbed it so early and so completely that we never thought to question it. But here is what that assumption misses. The people who built the ancient world, the ones who quarried stone, hauled nets, walked 20 miles between towns, farmed in rocky soil under relentless heat, did not organize their eating around meat. Meat was occasional, ceremonial, expensive. What kept those bodies moving, day after day, was bread. Specifically, bread made from grain that still carried its full structure and flour ground from legumes that contributed what grain alone could not. The combination was not accidental or primitive. It was the result of generations of practical knowledge, passed through hands and households long before anyone had a word for the thing it accomplished. The thesis here is not that meat is wrong or that bread is superior. The thesis is simpler and stranger than that. The bread at the center of Jesus' world was already doing something that most modern foods, including expensive modern protein sources, struggle to replicate. It was feeding whole bodies across whole days. And the story of how it did that begins not on a nutrition label, but in a courtyard in Galilee, before the sun has come up, with a woman whose hands already know what to do. Before the household woke, she was already at work. The courtyard was dark, the air still cool from the night, and the grinding stone had been waiting since the evening before, resting on its base with a faint smell of grain dust in its pores. She knelt or sat low, poured the measured grain into the saddle of the lower stone, and began to push the upper stone forward and back with her full body weight behind it. The sound of it was rhythmic and low, a constant grinding murmur that was as familiar in a Galilean village as the sound of birds or wind. In many households, this sound started before first light. In some, it had never fully stopped. The grain she worked was not soft or forgiving. Emmer wheat is a hulled grain, older than most of what we grow today, with a kernel wrapped tightly in its husk, and a body that resists the stone until it yields slowly into coarse, heavy flour. It smelled of the earth it came from, slightly nutty, slightly mineral, dense in a way that modern flour simply is not. Beside the grain, in a jar or a sack of rough cloth, were the dried pulses, lentils or fava beans or chickpeas, depending on the season and what the household had stored. These too went under the stone, mixed in with the grain or ground separately, and combined after, folded together into the flour before the water was ever added. The dough she made from this was not light. It held together with a density that you could feel in the hands. Pulling and pressing it required effort, and it pushed back. She shaped it by hand into rounds, flattened slightly, thick enough to hold heat all the way through. The hearth fire had been burning since she began grinding. The baking stone or clay surface was already hot. She laid the rounds down onto it and waited, watching the edge for the crust to firm, turning them once, smelling the moment they were ready. That particular deepening of the grain smell that told her the inside had set. By the time the household stirred, the bread was done. It sat in a stack or wrapped in cloth, still holding warmth from the stone. Each person took a portion before they left for the day. The laborer heading to a construction site. Now the fisherman walking down to the lake in the blue-gray pre-dawn light. The children going with their father into the fields. The bread they carried was not a snack or a supplement. It was the primary thing, the food that would carry them from one end of the working day to the other. Nothing else was guaranteed to be available. Nothing else was expected to do what that bread did. What made that bread what it was begins with the grain itself. Emmer wheat, the variety that farmers in the ancient Near East had grown for thousands of years before modern agriculture selected it nearly out of existence, is not the same creature as the refined white flour that lines modern grocery shelves. It is a different plant, a different structure, and a different eating experience entirely. And the kernel of emmer still carries its outer bran layers and its germ, the parts of the grain that contain the fiber, the fats, and a significant portion of its protein. When you grind emmer and bake with it, you are baking with the whole thing, not just the stripped interior starch that modern milling preferred for its softness and long shelf life. Emmer flour is heavier on the hand. It absorbs water differently, produces a denser crumb, and carries a flavor that people who encounter it for the first time often describe as earthier, more complex, more satisfying in a way they can't immediately name. That is not nostalgia speaking. The grain simply has more in it, but emmer alone does not complete the picture. The second ingredient, the one that quietly transforms everything, is the pulse flour mixed into the dough. In Galilean households, this meant lentils most commonly, or fava beans or chickpeas, depending on what was in storage. These were not luxury items. Every household kept them in quantity because they were cheap, storable, and filling. They were eaten whole in stews and soups, yes, but they were also dried and ground into flour and folded into bread as a matter of routine, not innovation. The ratio varied by household and season, but roughly 1 part pulse flour to 3 or 4 parts grain flour was a common working proportion. The combined dough was darker than a pure wheat loaf. It had a slightly denser smell, earthy and warm, with the faint nuttiness of dried legume. Baked on a hot stone in a clay oven or an open hearth, it formed a crust that was firm to the knock and a crumb that was tight and close. Not airy or springy, but genuinely substantial. You could break a piece from this loaf and feel its weight in your palm. You could press your thumb into it and feel resistance. This was the bread. Not ancient health food designed for modern sensibilities. Not a cultural curiosity. A practical object shaped by necessity. Dense, portable, calorie-sufficient, and carrying within its 2 combined ingredients something that thousands of years of trial and household wisdom had arrived at without any knowledge of amino acids or protein chemistry. The people who made it knew only that it worked, that the bodies it fed stayed strong across long days, that it was worth making every morning without fail, because the alternative, a household fed on grain alone, or pulse alone, or nothing at all, did not hold up in the same way, and the loaf that came off that hot stone was enough. The rest of the story is learning why. A single grain, eaten on its own, will feed a body, but not fully satisfy it. Wheat provides real energy. The dense starch breaks down into fuel the body can use across hours of work. But wheat protein is incomplete in a specific way. It lacks sufficient amounts of certain amino acids that the body cannot produce on its own and must find in food. Eat only wheat bread, day after day, and your muscles gradually find themselves without the full set of building materials they need. The body compensates, adapts, makes do, but it is working around an absence. Legumes fill that absence almost precisely. Lentils, chickpeas, and fava beans carry a protein profile that covers what grain leaves out. They also bring their own kind of slow-burning starch, on their own density of fiber, their own weight in the stomach that signals the body to hold steady rather than reach for more. When you combine the two, grain and legume in a single loaf, mixed together and baked, the proteins from each source complement the gaps in the other. The body receives something close to a complete set of what it needs from a single food. Think about what that meant for a mason laying stone in the Galilean heat. He ate his bread before the light was fully up. He worked through the morning with his arms and back and legs, lifting and placing and setting, sweating into the ground. The bread he had eaten was still moving through him, not as a quick surge of energy that would crest and fall by mid-morning, but as a long, steady availability of fuel that the body could draw on hour by hour, and his hands did not begin to shake. His focus did not thin. He did not find himself sitting in the shade at the third hour, emptied out and waiting for something to refill him. This is not a small thing. For people who depended entirely on their physical capacity to work, to earn, to survive, the difference between a food that held and a food that faded was the difference between a productive day and a desperate one. Ancient bakers did not know the mechanism. They knew the result. They knew that the bread with the lentil flour in it carried a person further than the bread without it, and that knowledge was passed from mother to daughter to granddaughter not as a recipe, but as a certainty lodged in the body. What changed over the long arc of history was the gradual narrowing of what bread was allowed to be. Refined flour milled smoother, legumes removed from the dough, shifted to the side dish, eventually to the margins of the Western plate entirely. The bread grew lighter, softer, faster to make, faster to sell. And quietly, without announcement, it stopped doing what bread used to do. The modern loaf gives a surge and then withdraws. It fills the stomach briefly and vacates. The body reaches again, sooner than it should, for something more. That persistent, low-grade insufficiency, the hunger that returns before the next meal, the energy that peaks and drops, is not a personal failure. It is the predictable result of a food stripped of the very components that once made it worth trusting. The ancient loaf was trustworthy. The people who ate it did not experience it as a spiritual concept. They experienced it in their legs at the end of the workday, so in the steadiness of their hands, in the absence of the emptiness that hunger produces. That was the whole point, and it is the thing that, once understood, changes how you hear every story in the Gospels where bread appears. Bread appears throughout sacred history, not as background detail, but as the primary object of encounter. The thing passed between hands, the thing blessed, the thing broken. But to hear those moments fully, it helps to understand what the bread actually was when it crossed from one hand to another. When Jesus took 5 loaves and fed a crowd of thousands on a Galilean hillside, the people sitting on that grass were not receiving crackers or wafers. They were receiving the daily bread of a working culture, dense rounds of grain and legume. You, the same kind of loaf that had already been filling their households every morning for generations. The miracle was not made smaller by this. It was made more particular. 5 loaves of that bread, broken among that many bodies, and everyone ate. Everyone was filled. The Greek word used is the one that means satisfied in the body. Not merely tasted, not symbolically nourished, but genuinely fed. That specificity matters. At the Last Supper, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and distributed it to the people sitting closest to him. The bread on that table was the bread of Passover, which followed its own traditions, but it was still grain bread made by hand in a household in Jerusalem. It was real food on a real table, smelling of hearth and grain, and the oil that had greased the baking surface. When he said, "This is my body," so he was holding something that had already spent thousands of years sustaining the bodies of his people. The weight of the loaf in his hands was not incidental to the moment. It was the ground the moment stood on. After the resurrection, on the road to Emmaus, 2 disciples walked with a stranger they did not recognize until he sat at table with them. He took bread, blessed it, broke it, and in that breaking, they knew him. Not in a speech, not in a theological argument, in the gesture of hands on bread. The act of breaking was so familiar, so specific to who he was and how he had always done it, that recognition arrived through the body before the mind could catch up. These moments reach back further, too. The showbread kept in the temple, 12 loaves placed before God each week, replaced with fresh bread every Sabbath, was not a decoration. It was grain made sacred through its regularity, its constancy, its presence at the center of worship as something that human hands made and God received. Elijah, exhausted and suicidal in the wilderness, was not given a vision or a sermon. An angel touched him and said, "Arise and eat." And what was there was bread baked on a stone and a jar of water, enough to carry him for 40 days. The manna in the wilderness, whatever its precise nature, was encountered and described in the language of bread. Something gathered in the morning, tasted like something made from grain, given daily and sufficient for the day. The rhythm of bread, daily, made by hand, shared at table, runs underneath all of it. What this accumulation of moments teaches is not doctrine. It teaches something older and more immediate, that bread earned its sacred weight by being materially trustworthy first. The people in those rooms and on those hillsides and in that wilderness knew what bread did in the body. They had felt it across lifetimes of mornings. So when it appeared in a moment of encounter with the divine, it carried everything it had already proven. It did not need to be explained. It only needed to be broken. Recovering this bread in a modern kitchen is not a complicated act. It does not require specialty equipment or ingredients available only to the dedicated. It requires an understanding of what went into the original loaf and a willingness to work with your hands in roughly the way that hands have always worked with dough. Begin with the grain. Here, the closest thing available today to ancient emmer is einkorn flour, which is sold by several small mills and increasingly available online or in natural food stores. Einkorn is an older wheat variety that retains more of its original structure than modern bread wheat. It has a nuttier flavor, a denser texture, and a protein profile that behaves differently from refined all-purpose flour. Spelt is another good option, slightly more available, with a slightly milder flavor but a similar density and whole grain character. If neither is accessible, whole wheat flour, stone ground if possible, meaning the bran and germ have not been separated out, will give you a loaf that is meaningfully closer to the ancient original than anything made with white flour. Use it without apology. And the people who first made this bread were working with what they had. To this grain base, add pulse flour in roughly a 1:3 ratio, 1 part pulse flour to 3 parts grain flour. Lentil flour is the easiest to find and produces the most neutral flavor, blending into the dough without announcing itself loudly. Chickpea flour is slightly more assertive, with a warmer, nuttier tone that works beautifully with the earthiness of einkorn or spelt. Fava bean flour, less common but available, produces a heavier loaf with a slightly more mineral character. All of them work. All of them were used. You can also make pulse flour at home by drying red lentils or chickpeas completely and running them through a blender or food processor until they reach a fine powder. Rough ground is acceptable and perhaps more historically honest than a perfectly uniform flour. To make the loaf, combine your flours in a large bowl. Roughly 3 cups of grain flour to 1 cup of pulse flour for a single round. Add a generous pinch of salt. If you want the bread to rise, add a small amount of active dry yeast dissolved in warm water, or use a sourdough starter if you maintain one. Ancient bread was often leavened with a piece of saved dough from the previous batch, a living ferment passed from baking to baking. So sourdough is the more historically resonant choice. But the loaf will also work unleavened, which produces something closer to a flatbread. Denser, chewier, very satisfying, and extremely ancient in its character. Add water gradually, mixing as you go, until the dough comes together into a cohesive mass. This dough will not be silky or extensible, the way a refined white bread dough is. It will be heavier, slightly rougher in texture, and it will hold its shape more firmly under the hands. That is correct. Work it for several minutes, pressing, folding, turning, until it feels unified rather than crumbly. Shape it by hand into a round, pressing it flat slightly so that the center will bake through. The loaf should be perhaps 1.5 to 2 inches thick at the center. If you have a baking stone, heat it in the oven at a high temperature for at least 30 minutes before you bake. Heat a cast iron skillet or Dutch oven does the same job and is perhaps even better. The enclosed heat produces a crust that mimics the effect of a clay oven. Bake the loaf at a high temperature, somewhere around 400 to 425 degrees, until the crust is genuinely firm and dark. And when you knock the bottom of the loaf, it sounds hollow. Let it rest. Do not cut it too soon. The inside needs time to finish setting after it leaves the heat. What comes out is not a sandwich loaf. It does not slice into neat, uniform pieces. You break it with your hands, the way bread was always meant to be broken, and the crumb inside is close and dense and slightly moist, with a flavor that carries the grain and the legume together in a way that is difficult to separate. Earthy, warm, faintly nutty, deeply satisfying in the mouth in a way that commercial bread almost never is. A piece of this, eaten in the morning, does something different in the body than what most modern bread does. It holds. It does not spike and crash. It settles in and stays, the way food used to stay, the way the fisherman's body knew it would as he pushed the boat out onto the dark water before dawn. You do not need to understand the mechanism to feel the difference. You only need to make the bread and eat it. The belief that real strength comes only from meat is not a lie, exactly. Meat does nourish. Meat has always had a place at the table, in festival and feast and necessity. But the belief that grain is merely filler, that bread without significant animal protein is somehow insufficient, somehow a lesser form of sustenance. That belief is not as old as people think. It is modern. It is particular to a way of eating that emerged from abundance and refinement, not from the long, patient knowledge of bodies working in sun and stone and field. The people of Galilee did not eat the way they ate. because they lacked access to something better. They ate that way because the food they had was genuinely good at its job. Their bread was complete in ways that took modern science centuries to articulate, and that completeness was arrived at not through analysis, but through the accumulated wisdom of generations of women at grinding stones, passing forward the knowledge that this grain and this legume, mixed together, made something worth trusting. Jesus ate that bread his whole life. He broke it with fishermen and tax collectors, and with crowds of strangers and a handful of close friends. He held it at the most sacred moment of his ministry and said, "This is enough. This is what my body is. Take it and remember." The bread that he held was the bread of his world, dense, sustaining, made by hand, proven across lifetimes of labor to be exactly what working human bodies needed. That knowledge is recoverable. The loaf is makeable. The table where bread is broken is still the oldest form of belonging any of us knows. If this episode opened something for you, a question, a hunger, a desire to carry something forward, bake the bread, share it with someone, and let the table do what tables have always done. If you want to keep walking further into this world, there is more waiting here. Come back.